I'm here with author and artist Mary Hettmansperger, and Mary, you have some great ideas always for metalworking, and these are buttons with a twist.
Well, what I do is a lot of the buttons end up being very fancy and have a lot of metal quality to them, and I love the colors, a lot of the brown, big old brown buttons on the big coats, and
Definitely.
So I've tried to utilize them, and the challenge is, for me at least, to make it not look like a button. I'm just not that fond of.
It's a button in disguise.
Yeah, it's kind of a button in disguise. So there's always something that you have to kind of deal with, though, especially when you're looking at the shank buttons. And this is just one of the problem-solving things I've come up with, is I create almost a little donut, a little divot for this little shank to fit in. Otherwise, it just sits right on the surface. So I poke my holes, and basically you want to get your metal annealed so it's very soft, and then I just hammer it first this way, creating a nice, a subtle dome, and then I go just in the center of it and hammer it down in the center. Now you can use the dapping block if you have a really big shank fit in the back and you need it, you need more of a place to find that to fit. The other thing here, this is fun. This is actually using a button a little bit different, but I've taken 2 pieces of 18 or 16 gauge wire. I just hammer out my ends. I didn't burn a ball or anything on the ends of them. I just actually hammered them, and that creates a real nice paddle. I took a 28 gauge wire and I just wove it back and forth, just basically a figure 8, leaving both of my wires ends on each side. I created, again, the same little divot I did on the first one, but this time that's sort of my middle piece.
You kind of made your own button there.
Made my own button, and then my back piece is actually the bigger button.
And then you could attach this to something else to create a pendant or a
totally.
pin. And let's look at the pins that you made too, because these show 2 different ways of how you have the button attached.
Right, and this is just a little 2-hole button. This I actually used Brad's from the scrapbooking store, and this one again I had a much bigger shank button, so I had to create a very big divot for it to fit in, or it would just sit on top. And
I mean, it's kind of a setting for the button.
It is a very
really.
setting,
yeah.
almost like
You're
a bezel.
creating a subtle setting.
A little bit of bezel.
So, and on this one, you layered the pieces together and did some wire wrapping here too.
Right.
This is one that I've done a lot. I love the way that they look together.
Oh, they do. And this is nice because this is just a button. So I've used this was a
metal
bead,
button.
a metal button. But then I turned around and used the button as a layer.
It looks great.
Yeah, and it just gives another element.
And these really are in disguise here.
They really are. And what's great about this, and I'm going to show you how to do this one. This is fun because this is, again, using the shank button. You could use any button in here. And what I do, especially the ones that are rounded around the top, what's nice is I'm going to create basically a bezel. And as you can see, I'm kind of balancing this, and that means that I'm going to have to probably put a spacer in the corners. But to do this, you want to make sure that your metal is nice and annealed. And the way you're going to do that is just with a propane torch. You can use the fire scale, you can take it off, but basically right now it's very soft. This is a 24 gauge copper sheeting, and I'm just going to show you how. I'm going to open up my disc cutter, and I'm going to slide this in, and I'm going to push this down.
And do you just choose a circle that's slightly larger than your button, or smaller, I mean?
A little bit smaller.
Depends.
Yeah,
Okay.
A little bit smaller. And then I'm going to take this. And the way that I do my disc cutter, I'm kind of finicky with disc cutters because they can get kind of screwed up really quick. You just drop your thing in there, and then you come in, and I always use the acrylic hammer and let it fall completely through.
Okay.
And then what you have is a really nice hole. And if you notice, I have no texture whatsoever on this piece. I've just annealed it. Then I'm going to take and go to a larger hole here, center it, put my dapping circle up here, and on this I probably will use a regular hammer. And I start to bend it down, and then I gently, because I don't want to mess up my dapping block, but I gently tap it around the top.
Just so that it's flat
Just so
enough
it's
to
flattened.
attach them.
And then push, and then dap. And then you can kind of check to see, how you're going.
Where you are.
And as you can see on this one, there's 2 different ways I did this. On this one, I actually went back in, did some steel wool, and took and made the shine back.
It looks
on
great.
this one is gel flux. So what I do on the metal is I put a gel flux coating down and then heat it, and it will turn that nice red. But this is great because then this, you can capture buttons. Well, that one's a little bit small. But you can capture your buttons and sort of, bezel them inside, make it a little bit smaller. But
yeah, that would
it
look
makes
great.
it really look nice.
Yeah, it
makes
does.
it really look nice.
Let's take a look at the button necklace where you trapped it in the center there. That
Yeah,
looks so
and
pretty.
this is nice because, a lot of buttons are very thick, so you don't want them looking like they're just sitting on the surface. So by doing it this way, you can see I've got my dimension built up with my little discs. On this one, I just use nuts and bolts, but to connect this to this side, this back one, I'm going to turn this around so you can see the back side. You can see where I've got 4 little eyelets. That is a piece of metal that this button is actually connected to. So the button got connected to that piece of metal by brads. And the brads are great because they just poke in and open up.
I love the way you ran the wire through the pendant too. That's
it
a
makes
little
it
bit
a
of
real
different
easy
look.
hang.
Yeah, it looks really good. And this one is another idea of layering the buttons on top of each
And
other.
that's just a little bitty button on the top that I basically just sewed onto a piece of metal.
Yeah, lots of technique ideas. Well, thanks, Mary. These are some great tips.
Okay.
And I will be right back.